Alright, so here's one of my hexagonal beehive frames. This was created using a jig that had a printed out hexagon. It was used for alignment of the pieces, and then they were assembled with wood glue and a tack nailer. These holes right here, 1/4 inch for 1/4 inch doweling spacers, were drilled using a drill press by just simply placing it between the sides between the jaws of a vise, turning it and drilling the consecutive holes, then flipping it around and repeating the process to get this alternating hole pattern, which you'll see here in a minute. This is one of my 2 improvised devices. I built sort of like a ridiculous dowel cutting table saw using a micro table saw using a Dremel tool with a grinding bit and a primitive stop. Just pieces of scrap cardboard glued together with super glue. Actually works really well. I'll demo that in just a second. So it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. This cuts 1/4 inch sections of dowel, which is ideal for these holes. They're designed so that 5/16 of the dowel is left sticking out, which is, as people who are familiar with bees will know, is called bee space, and that's what the bees prefer to move around in. So just tap them down with a hammer, and then check it with the calipers. 5/16 sticking out, just what I want, and just gonna repeat that process all the way around. Just to show you how accurate this is, after cutting up an entire dowel in less than probably 2 minutes. Right on the money, 3/4 of an inch. So that's phase 1 of the frame. There's 12 pegs, 6 on each side. And then the technical challenge is, how do we get a peg in the very middle of these segments? Now, with a little bit of foresight, it would have been easy to do that before the frames were constructed, but when we were building the frames, we didn't really think that far ahead. So I created this jig here, which is interesting. It's tangential to the first part of the process. So in other words, the little stops here fit against these pegs on both sides, and then the jig snaps down in place using those 2 pegs to brace it and center it. And then I have this absurdly complicated looking contraption here on my drill for drilling. So I've got just the standard, sorry, I'm having to like try to point and use the camera at the same time. It's not easy, but the first part of the assembly is just a standard quick release 1/4 inch chuck, and then that goes to a larger drill chuck that also has a 1/4 inch shank. And then I've cut a piece of aluminum tubing as a stop to prevent the drill from going too deep. Right now it's set to go exactly as deep as I want it. And then on top of that, I have a custom tri-clamp stop that affixes to the aluminum tubing around the drill bit to provide even more of a barrier, so when I'm drilling that hole, ideally I'm never going to go too deep. Sorry, I'm really having trouble with the camera. Hopefully I'll be able to get a good shot of this. I'm stabilizing it with my feet. Alright, and then the jig comes off, and got a really nice hole that is unfortunately going all the way through, and that's because my jig, not my jig, but my drill bit slipped a little earlier, so I have to reconfigure it. It's nothing wood glue won't fix. But anyway, that process is just repeated all the way around with the correct setting, and then you get these over here, which is a completed frame that has the 5/16 spacer on 3 sides of the frame. Pretty minimal. I think of this as like high-tech, low-tech, because believe it or not, it's actually really challenging to create a perfectly hexagonal frame like this. That was actually the hardest part of the hive building process so far, because of the tolerances with the angles. Basically at each one of these junctions, if it's off by even a fraction of a degree, and you're cutting every one of these segments using the same, settings on your saws, then you end up with one junction, the final junction, where they all meet together, that's actually off by, in our case it was 3 degrees, which is still pretty minimal, but it's enough to throw the whole hive out of whack. So we ended up having to use a printed template, which I then had to go over with using a hand drawn lines with an angle finder, because industrial printing isn't even precise enough to create a hexagon of this size with perfect angles. So yeah, that's basically how to produce the frames, and I'll make a quick follow-up video when I have all these finished, showing how they fit into the hive and all that. But anyway, just kind of, I thought it was fun, like all the silly little jigs and junk I had to come up with just to make this happen. And I feel like there's this one YouTuber, I can't remember his name, I think it's like Wooden Gears or something. Anyway, he does these really cool videos where he builds all of his own equipment, and he uses like really kind of what I think of as, like I was saying, low-tech, high-tech solutions, which you kind of just throw them together using scraps, and often they can be just as effective as a expensive, commercially produced product. Like this jig, it's just 4 screws and 2 pieces of scrap wood, and it works, really well. I mean, as well as a drill press when it's used properly. Anyhow, yeah, thanks for watching.